Upstairs at Froelich, show 106, reel 1.
What's going on, you motherfucker?
Mommy's gone. She's taken George with her.
Your mother's a bitch.
So, as always, we need to thank Mark Bertelli and Rex Diamond over at Cult Film Exploration Blu-ray DVD VHS Collectors for letting us post. Also, Jeremiah Johnson over at The Canister for letting us put our podcasts up over there as well.
And also, let me see, VHS Rewind, of course. Just about everybody I've ever had any kind of meaningful contact with when it came to podcasting, because I believe it was Mark Giacomo there, the founder of VHS Rewind, who got me into podcasting. He was the one who told me. He said, "You've got a lot of interesting stories, Dave. You've got a nice voice. You don't have any perceivable accent. Perhaps you should do a podcast." So I was like, okay, why not? And here we are 5 years later, I think. Well, it was at the end of 2014, I think I started podcasting. Or maybe the beginning of 2015, something like that.
See, then unfortunately you run into me with this thick Chicago accent, so I don't know how well
Chicago.
Exactly, Chicago.
Chicago police. Dennis Franz over here. Also, what else? Oh, vintage HBO guides. Tony over there, very nice people over there too. We're going to be talking about Perry King, star of two movies that are both coincidentally were part of the British Video Nasty List. They were both, one of them was censored, and another one was just plain flat out forbidden. The first one is The Possession of Joel Delaney from 1972. This movie was released in May of that year, just a few months before I was born. And this is very much it's a creepy, atmospheric movie that belongs in the early 70s because it has that great 70s vibe about it. Like, I was comparing it to, say, a movie like Let's Scare Jessica to Death or The Exorcist. And this is very similar to The Exorcist in that way.
Yeah, there's a lot of good Exorcist comparisons in that movie. Even though The Exorcist, the book was written around that time, but the movie didn't come out till a year later.
Yeah.
And it had that nice creepy vibe, especially now. Now, for those who are listening, I couldn't get through the whole thing, so I'm going to let my co-host talk about this mostly. But am I right when I say this took place in New York?
Yes, it's New York City. New York City. This was a different New York City.
Oh yeah, that was one of the things I like. I really did like the production values of this movie. I like how it felt very guerrilla style filmmaking. Like, you could tell it was really low budget.
Well, no, they did spend money on it. It's just that it costs a lot of money to shoot in New York,
but
you got Shirley MacLaine in there. Shirley MacLaine was like an A-list actor, and she's part of this whole affair. I think. This is what I'll tell you, because I know a little bit about the background of the movie. It was based on a book by Ramona Stewart. It does deal with possession. Shirley MacLaine has a connection to The Exorcist because she was a very close friend of William Peter Blatty, who based the character of Regan MacNeil on Shirley MacLaine's daughter. And as a matter of fact, in the first edition of The Exorcist, there's a picture of a little girl there that's slightly out of focus and it looks a little weird. That is Shirley MacLaine's daughter. He said, "I can get you on the short list for this if you want to be in the movie." And she turned it down because she thought it was a little bit too close to her own family. So I think, because they were still shooting, The Exorcist went into all kinds of overtime and they went over budget, and they were shooting forever because Friedkin is one of these perfectionist pain-in-the-ass film directors.
Oh, God, 100%.
So they were still shooting in this movie and trying to finish it in the time it took for them to cast, shoot, and make the Possession of Joel Delaney.
And I bet you Shirley MacLaine was sitting over there like, yeah, I made the right decision. She was sitting there, it's like, yeah, you know what? When you have a gut feeling about something, you know when to sit out, you know when to fold your hand. She made probably the best decision because she still remained on the A-list. She still is on the A-list.
Well, I think that Ellen Burstyn is really good in the movie. She was fantastic in it. She got an Oscar nomination. Of course, Linda Blair, which we'll probably have a Linda Blair episode coming out in a few weeks, playing the part, also Oscar nominated. It was a big success. It was a huge movie that had like lines around the corner from what I think my mother told me about it. And Shirley MacLaine could have very easily played that part. She could have played the mother in that, and because she's kind of doing it in this movie too, because it's about, basically, she's 38 years old in this film. She plays this pampered, wealthy, divorced socialite, and her younger brother, very young. I mean, like, he's 22 years old in this movie. He could be her son, based on their ages, and they have this kind of weird sexual chemistry.
Yeah, I was literally okay. So I was watching it and I'm like, is this her lover or her brother? And then you find out it's her brother. I'm like, okay, they're keeping it a little too close in the family, I think.
They are very, very close in a weird kind of disturbing way that you never see siblings really kind of behaving. But she also, I mean, like, it's weird because she's not only, an older sister, but she kind of acts like a mother to him as well. She babies him.
Yeah, she does have those maternal, you can tell later on in the movie, those maternal instincts really start coming out.
Right.
And then she has her own kids too on top of that.
Yeah, she has her own kids. And so because she's so close to Joel, she's like constantly concerned about him, and she's like completely in his life. He gets an apartment up in East Harlem, what they used to call Spanish Harlem. They don't call it that anymore because a lot of white people have moved up there because they saw how cheap the rent was. So a lot of these kind of privileged, rich white people would go and buy townhouses and then refab them, and they're living there and they're making it all hipster and everything. I used to work in East Harlem, and it doesn't look like the way it looks in this movie.
Well, same can be said about Times Square of the 70s versus Times Square now.
Yeah, and that's...
you say, Spanish Harlem, that was a nice little history bit for me. I didn't know that, but I was always under the, the Times Square thing, how gritty and grungy it was back in the late 70s, early 80s, and then all of a sudden Giuliani comes in and he cleans the place up.
He did. He totally cleaned it up, and he probably did it. I think it was a good move to do that, actually, because there were certain parts of Times Square you could not walk around in.
But I'm telling you, if I could go back, I would just 1 week. I would love to go to New York and visit Times Square in the 70s. Not the bad parts, but just I want to go to the Grindhouse theaters, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. There's a great picture that I put in here in this that I sent to you. I showed you the picture of the theater actually showing Possession of Joel Delaney, and as you can see, there are some other questionable titles that are playing in other places. Shirley MacLaine. This is really Shirley MacLaine's movie. Perry King is very good in it. He's excellent in the movie. He's very frightening, very scary with what happens to him. But she is playing this kind of weird passive-aggressive game with everyone she knows. She has this Puerto Rican maid named Veronica, I believe, and she kind of patronizes her. She doesn't treat her very well, and she has her children. She's not really kind of close with her children. I mean, she's closer with her brother. But what happens is, Joel goes nuts. He's hauled away by the cops. He tried to attack his super in the building. He's screaming in Spanish. They take him to Bellevue. She's really concerned. She finds out that he has this friend who he has this friend that he's been communicating with, who is this kid who went crazy or something. And so the psychiatrist, of course, this is where we kind of get into the Exorcist territory of the whole thing, is that we're trying to explain away weird religious supernatural stuff with science, and it doesn't seem to be working, and people don't really get it into their heads. They just think that Joel's just disturbed. And she goes to his apartment because she has to take care of his cat or something. She finds a switchblade. She talks to Joel's girlfriend, who tells her that he tends to get violent. She goes and visits Joel at Bellevue, and he doesn't remember anything, but then he moves in with her, and he starts getting weird, really screaming weird. And he starts looking at Veronica like she's hot, which she's not a bad-looking woman, But there's this very strange culture clash going on between Shirley MacLaine and all the Puerto Ricans in the movie, the faces of the people. There's a scene where she's kind of trapped, or she's kind of lost in Spanish Harlem, and all these people are looking at her, and it's really scary, and she's just trying to find a cab, get the hell out of there, There's some really great stuff in here, and I think this is one of Shirley MacLaine's best performances. She seems so alive to me in this movie, and I compare it to even say The Apartment. There was a classic movie that Billy Wilder directed with her and Jack Lemmon, or later on in life with Terms of Endearment. This is a really good performance from her. I'm only limited to a few Shirley MacLaine movies in my repertoire, but The Trouble with Harry too, Alfred Hitchcock. I remember that one.
That's a great movie too. That is a great movie. This one, she was really good. I did enjoy her a lot. I 100% bought the fact that she was a socialite. I 100% believed her performance. Now, that's where we compare it to Exorcist. I don't think she could have pulled... you say she could have done Ellen Burstyn's part.
I think that Ellen Burstyn was doing an impersonation of Shirley MacLaine. That's what I think. I think she looked at some of Shirley MacLaine. Maybe she knew Shirley MacLaine. Maybe they hung out together. Maybe she helped her with her part a little bit. Because I feel like because it's the mother in The Exorcist that is based on Shirley MacLaine. So... it's like if you wrote, I don't know, you wrote a horror movie and you based the lead character on, I don't know, your wife's mother or something, somebody you know.
I'm going to have to just agree with you on this one because Ellen Burstyn, I'm more familiar with her filmography, mainly because of Requiem for a Dream. And then you have The Exorcist, and she did several other movies.
Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, which got her the Oscar.
Yep.
So she had a little more clout, I guess, at that time than Shirley MacLaine. She was really hot at the time for Warner Brothers, so they really wanted her in the movie. There's like this whole bit where she just, when she finds out that this Puerto Rican kid actually died several months before, then she picks up her kids and she hauls off to Long Island. She goes to like their boarded up, I guess, summer house or whatever. She didn't know that Joel followed them all the way over there. And he's doing this whole slick back kind of with a leather jacket and the switchblade, screaming Spanish at her. And it's a very disturbing bit in there. He kills the psychiatrist too. I mean, he likes to chop off people's heads. It gets pretty gory too.
That was one of the parts I skimmed through. That was kind of disturbing. It was just like, wow.
And also making the kid undressed too. And there was an article that I didn't even know about this. Stephen King wrote an article about the movie a while back for Entertainment Weekly or something when he was doing his weekly column. And he was saying, if this movie were made today, it would be given an NC-17 rating just on that scene, that one scene alone, of the kid being forced to dance around without any clothes on. It gives me the shivers. We move on to Class of 1984. This is another, I'll read from my notes here. This is Perry King again, and he represents your typical Paul Kersey-like liberal music teacher on his first day at Lincoln High School, where the gangs and the punks rule. He meets up with Roddy McDowall, who I met once. I met Roddy McDowall once, who advises him.
Lucky you.
I met him actually at a store called Forbidden Planet. It's down on the Lower East Side in Manhattan. He was just hanging out there buying comic books. He was when he was alive. He's no longer with us, but. He was a big comic book fan, so he just tended to. But he was very nice to me, actually.
I heard another story that someone just ran into him one time, and it's just, wait a second, you're Peter Vincent. He goes, yes, I am Peter Vincent, the fearless vampire hunter. He just got into character right in front of this guy.
Yeah.
From what I understand, Roddy McDowall was the nicest man on the planet.
Yeah.
One of the nicest guys.
Well, he's one. I've living in New York. I've had brushes with many celebrities. He was one of the nicer people, yeah. So Roddy McDowall advises Perry King to brush up on his fighting skills and get a weapon. And the principal has a closed circuit security system. There are metal detectors. This is what high schools look like now. They didn't look like that back in 1984. When I started my freshman year at it was my sophomore year when we moved up to New York and I changed high schools, I noticed that there were closed circuit security cameras and metal detectors. And I'm thinking, this is the best job he could find is in this horrible school, which it's graffiti everywhere. Everything is very over the top.
It is. And I mean, you say to yourself, were there schools, now the movie takes place in 1982, or was filmed in 1982. I mean, I think it takes place in 82, but were there really high schools like this around that time?
I think that's part of what makes this exploitation. I think it's definitely, it's like one of these things where, say your middle income family, your middle income mom and dad are watching this and they're like, oh my God, it's going to get horrible, Margaret. What are we going to do? We're taking Junior out of public school and homeschooling him from now on, or putting him in private school or something like that. This is just absolute madness. He goes into his class. Lisa Langlois, who is one of my favorites, I absolutely love her. She was one of the original Scream Queens. She was in a whole bunch of movies that I've enjoyed over the years, and she's a fine-looking woman to boot. She's filleting a clarinet and licking Michael J. Fox. Michael J. Fox this is one of his early roles. This is after Midnight Madness, I want to say.
Yeah, now I believe this movie was shot in Canada, was shot in Toronto.
Yeah.
So if that be the case, that's why he was part of the production, because at the time, I don't think Family Ties was on the air yet, and he was still working as a Canadian actor.
Probably around the time. This is probably before he got the Family Ties gig.
Yeah, this is right before.
Even though he looks a little bit doughy here. He seems a little doughy, and he's got a bowl cut.
Yeah, that doesn't suit him all that well.
No, it doesn't. But
it really did.
And he doesn't play. He's not doing Alex P. Keaton. He's just doing he's doing, what he kind of reminds me of? I don't know. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Ralph Wiggum in The Simpsons.
Yes,
just
that
a
is
little,
100% right.
100% even wearing the same clothing as Ralph Wiggum.
I mean, the thing is, he's just there. You know, I mean, he has some screen time. He has a couple of good lines, but for the bulk of the movie, he's just there.
Yeah. Okay, so Perry King he's trying to play timid with these kids, but the thing is, he does look like he could kick these kids' asses if he really wanted to. He's taller. He seems more kind of threatening and imposing than Timothy Van Patten. Timothy Van Patten is such a. I messaged you while I was watching the movie. I was talking about how such a prick he is in this movie.
Oh yeah. Hardcore prick.
He's not. I mean, like Timothy Van Patten was kind of like. Well, he was in this show called White Shadow with Ken Howard, and then he was in the show with Lee Van Cleef called Master. Well, it was called The Master, but then they repackaged it as Master Ninja, and this was during the ninja craze of the early '80s. It didn't last very long. It was like a handful of episodes, and they ran them on Mystery Science Theater. And also Timothy Van Patten would become a director. He directed the first 2 episodes of Game of Thrones, so he wound up becoming a director after acting. I believe he's Dick Van Patten's brother or half brother, something like that. So he's got this gang, and it's just so weird. Well, first the music class. I mean, they have pacing and tempo issues, and of course. Perry King is like a really good music teacher because he builds the character and the confidence in these kids. It's kind of like Lean on Me, except it's horrible what happens in the school. But
terrible.
But I'm listening to it. And I hear the song "Let's Have a War" by Fear playing in the background, which was one of my favorite songs. And they got the rights to that. But of course, you could get the rights to music back then. It didn't cost an arm and a leg. And these punks, I'm thinking they dress like rejects from Mad Max.
I mean, like you said on our Tough Turf episode. I imagine this is what the director and the screenwriters thought that teenagers looked like back in the 80s.
I guess. Well, okay. That was Mark Lester, right?
Yep, Mark Lester, who later went on to do the greatest action movie of all time.
Which was Commando.
But
he also didn't he do Firestarter?
Yes, he did. I believe he also did Showdown in Little Tokyo.
Right, yeah.
Now that movie's really underrated.
Is that Dolph Lundgren was in that?
Yeah, Dolph Lundgren, Brandon Lee.
Right.
No, that was just a great movie too. I mean, Mark Lester was really, really good in the 80s. Like Class of 1984 started his career, but then he actually got some really good steady work right after that. You know, then you got Firestarter, then you did Commando. Then
Didn't he actually start under Roger Corman too?
Ooh, good call. Let me look that up.
I believe he started
I can finally do that now.
Doing like editing, and he did some really cheap flicks for New World at the time.
Let's see. I'm looking it up right along with you. So, yes, he was. Let's see. Twilight Mania's B-movie director.
Yeah, Steel Arena, Truck Stop Women, Bobby Joe and the Outlaw. Oh, he directed Roller Boogie with Linda Blair again. So here we have more Linda Blair connections. Yeah, everything really escalates. That he obviously gets on the bad side of these punks. They start harassing him. And my problem with Timothy Van Patten is he just looks too white bread and too handsome to be the leader of a gang. And
yeah, I mean, that's my feeling exactly. It's like you look at this guy and you say, you're bossing Perry King around, really?
And it is okay. It isn't just that they're a gang. They're not just like getting into mischief. They're into like drugs, prostitution, extortion. And I'm thinking they should be applying for business grants instead of getting into crime because apparently they're very well organized.
You know, exactly. It's like you're doing all this stuff. Why are you spending all this time in high school? Is this your way of networking?
And there's also there's also the fact that Timothy Van Patten is apparently an idiot savant because he's a really talented piano player. Which
I mean, a lot of this movie makes absolutely zero sense, but at the same time, it's an enjoyable piece of exploitation garbage.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Everything about the movie, it's not completely like the content, all the graphic stuff that you see can be easily cut out of the movie because I remember it playing on regular broadcast TV. They just cut out all the violence. There isn't that much in the way of like profanity or anything either. But they sold it because Michael J. Fox rather was becoming such a huge star. So they put his picture all over advertising for the movie when it was played on regular television, starring Michael J. Fox. Even though it's Michael Fox as credited in the movie. Even though
his part wasn't even that meaty or juicy, but
it was really actually, you know, I remember. God, I mean, like so many memories started flooding out when I was watching it because I remember they created a distraction to stab him, and I remember that whole scene in the cafeteria. So they blow up Perry's car for fuck's sake, and the argument that the cops are not helping Perry at all with this. They're like, nobody saw it. If nobody saw it, then it didn't happen. They didn't do it. This is ridiculous. I'm thinking,
And then
all you have to do these days is accuse somebody of something, and they did it practically,
I mean, he goes to the kid's house. Perry King goes to his house for Christ's sake, and basically is all his mom does. Oh, he's a good kid. He wouldn't hurt anybody.
Yeah.
And what is it? 37 years later, we're still getting those same damn excuses. Shows that times really haven't changed. I mean, seriously, how many kids you hear say, "Oh, he's a good kid. He wouldn't hurt anybody." Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
And then they just don't. Okay, no, adults are bad. My kid's a great kid. What is it? Tim Van Patten does so much freaking garbage to Perry King in this movie. And the fact that
and then what they did to Roddy McDowell's lab, I mean, that's fucking psychotic what they did. And after that, I mean, I don't understand why that principal still has a job. He should be fired for that. Principals have been fired for less. I've seen principals get fired for less than that. So Timothy Van Patten apparently saw Dirty Harry, and he figured out the best way to get rid of this guy is to frame him. So he beats the shit out of himself in front of Perry King. And, of course, everybody suspects Perry King of beating the crap out of him.
Fight Club ripped that off, by the way.
It seems to have that kind of connection. But also, it's a ripoff of Dirty Harry because the Scorpio Killer did that too. He pays a guy to beat the shit out of him, and then he can say that Harry did it to him. Even on suspicion, they can be picked up. That's what I was thinking throughout this whole thing. Even on suspicion, they can be taken downtown and questioned and all kinds of stuff. If somebody says somebody did something, they can look at things. They can act like fucking cops. Jesus Christ. I want to get to why this movie is above average, why it's better than your typical kind of exploitation. And I'd say it's because the teachers, Roddy McDowell and Perry King, are just trying to do their job, which is to inspire kids. It gets to be too much for Roddy. He goes nuts. I remember this scene plain as day when I saw it again. He pulls a gun on the class. And he's forcing them to do their work at gunpoint, which I think is just fantastic. That's like a really great scene. And I was so
that scene was hard to watch though because it was Roddy McDowell.
Well, yeah, but the thing, you believe him. You believe him because it's Roddy McDowell.
I know.
I mean, like
I believed his character, but it was just like at the same time, like
you can't hire Kurt Russell. You can't hire Kurt Russell to play this part. You have to hire somebody like Roddy McDowell. He sells it so well,
He did. Both great performances by Perry King and Roddy McDowell, especially Roddy McDowell.
Now,
so underrated in that movie, but I think that may have helped him get the Fright Night part.
Yeah, well, Roddy McDowell was not beneath doing jobs. He if you wanted him for a movie, he was there, and he always brought his A game with him when he was there, no matter what movie it was.
And it's a shame this day and age, no other actor likes to do that.
Yeah,
I mean, like you take Bruce Willis for example. He will whore himself out for money for any part, right? But he will never. But depending on the movie, he won't bring his A game.
Now, I want to talk about the one thing I didn't like about the movie, and I think you know what it is: the rape scene. When
exactly.
They broke into his. I mean, he's getting ready for this great performance. He's doing the War of 1812 with his class, and they have become such an incredible group of musicians. He's getting ready for this. They break in as his wife is getting ready to go and see this performance, and they each take turns raping her, and they even take a picture, and they bring the picture to him. It's very it's Hitchcockian in a way too, because you don't quite know how Perry King is going to react. This is when he finally loses it, and he just goes complete Charles Bronson on them.
And he just says, fuck it, I'm done. You're all gonna die.
But
you are right. That rape scene was the worst. It's hard. Death Wish too bad.
It's hard because it wasn't. Thankfully, it was not as explicit. But it's hard for me because is this what he needed to light a fire under his ass and go after these guys? I don't know. Could it have been a different way? Could it have been rewritten? Could it have been written a different way? But then I understand what kind of movie this is. It does want to pick up those exploitation points because this is the kind of stuff that sold movies like this back then.
I mean, you want to get butts in the seats, so kidnapping, while it may work, I think they'd get a little more controversy, maybe some more notice if they did a rape scene. You can see why they did it because it was a product of its time, but this day and age, not so much.
It also, it didn't seem, I hate to say this because I don't really know. But the rape scene did not seem particularly well acted by either the lady or the rapists. It seemed like they were kind of going through the motions to do a rape scene.
You could tell they were uncomfortable doing it.
Yes, it seemed.
I think everybody was just uncomfortable filming that scene.
Yes.
So they just didn't know how to act it out because nobody had ever been in a situation like that before.
Yeah.
Which brings into question, how could they pull it off in Death Wish 2 so well?
That's why I said Michael Winter is a sick fuck.
Yeah,
he probably did
sadist.
He probably did like
sadist.
20 takes. And from what I understand in the Cannon documentary, he wasn't particularly kind to his actors either.
All right, so I talked about this in a previous episode. This is the Warner clamshell. This one is rare. This one is very rare. It was like a very short space of time that you saw this movie, Love at First Bite, released on Warner Home Video. It was produced by an independent film production company made up of Melvin Simon, Robert Kaufman, and George Hamilton. Love at First Bite, a Dracula spoof, which was a very popular movie at the box office. I saw it in the theater because, it's kind of a fun movie for the whole family, I guess, about a creature of the night who kills people and sucks their blood. But we have George Hamilton, Susan St. James, and Richard Benjamin as a kind of a Van Helsing who happens to be dating Susan St. James. You have Dick Shawn, who we talked about from Angel, and Artie Johnson there in the special box. The movie was directed by Stan Gigrati, who I remember had directed Mr. Mom later, a couple of years later. And as you can see, it's an Orion Pictures release at the time. On the back, Dracula takes a bite of the Big Apple. Everybody dreams of the perfect woman in his Transylvanian hideaway. Count Dracula is no exception. And the movie is rated PG, and I believe this is an American release. Let's take a look at the tape. Ah, yes, it is. It's a slightly worn, it's a little bit stained, but it might be ink running or something like that. But as you can see, it's, again, in good shape. No mold. None of these tapes I have seem to have any mold. Of course, I might pop open one at some point. There is no Warner shield here, which is very interesting. It might be that this was transplanted into a different clamshell plastic, but this is most definitely a Warner Home Video release.